Wednesday night or evening, Tuesday the 20th of July. I've already done a 2-star alignment towards Arcturus and Spica using the equatorial flip approach. Now I've got the scope centered on Vega. It's somewhere up there, and it can only be found in the finder scope this time of evening. Although I have found bright stars like Arcturus and Vega as early as 6 o'clock, 2 hours before sunset, so it's quite extraordinary. I lined Vega up in the middle of the screen. I'm going to try the synchronize function again, which means, in my estimation, since I don't really know how to do it, that I have to let Vega drift for a while, then put it in sync and then move it back to the center of the screen. However, yeah. Also notice I've got the shutter speed at 1/4000, 1/4000th of a second, and the AGC bumped up to 36. That's because the nebula filter is still installed in the 1.25" diagonal, and I will be going after the same nebula last night, but I am going to use some compromise values for gain, bumping the gain from 30 to 36 and bumping the exposure from 64 flood to 128 flood as a nice compromise between what I was seeing with all the pixelation and nebulosity that was just cosmetically, artistically, just not that attractive. So that's the plan for the evening. Okay, it's about 9:45 right now. We're going to start with M57. A planetary nebula in Lyra, magnitude 9.4, a little more than 1 arc minute in size, 2,300 light years distant. The sky is still bluish out. I can make out maybe one other star in Lyra other than Vega itself. I'm using the nebula filter this evening, and during this time I've boosted the auto gain control to about 40, I think it's 42, and the shutter speed to 128. There was too much pixelation at 256. So I'm hoping we're going to get a better, actually more aesthetic view, as well as a little better contrast and smaller stars using the nebula filter, which has a narrow bandpass selected for light passing through a planetary nebula or emitted from planetary nebula and other types of cold dark matter. Here you go. After aligning on Altair, a technique that I find works better for ensuring that whatever your study is that you want will end up near the middle of the screen, I'm now pushing off to M27 in Vulpecula, magnitude 7.3. This is quite a large planetary nebula, probably 6 times as wide as the ring. Pushing it to 128 with a nebula filter and 42, I believe, in terms of the gain, AGC. So let's take a look at it. Once again, it's still early in the evening. The sky hasn't quite darkened up. From my point of view, it looks pretty bespeckled, which is one of the problems with pushing the sensitivity too high and the gain too high. You don't get nice continuous flow. This is something that I would hope would be eliminated by going to a shutter speed that's slower with maybe a little more gain control. I think maybe I'll drop the gain control back to 36 and see if it improves this. But from where I'm sitting, the nebula is quite expansive. and it does look a bit more like a butterfly or perhaps an hourglass than it does a dumbbell. Let me go ahead and adjust the automatic gain control down just a little bit to see if we can get rid of the bespeckling. Well, AGC doesn't seem to have really improved the pixelation by much. It's probably the best view looking through the camera. It looks like when you use this camera on the screen, you basically want to subtend an angle about 15 to 20 degrees below the screen to get the maximum image contrast and illumination. So I think I'm going to leave it on 30 decibels for the rest of my studies this evening and 128 flood. Once again, the Dumbbell Nebula M27. .30 flood, 128 flood, 30 auto gain control with a nebula filter in place. It does look smoother than when I pushed up the auto gain control. It's definitely smoother at 128 than it was at 256 in terms of the flood and exposure time. Almost aesthetically appealing, except it has no color. Well, I can play with that a little more. There's probably settings for that. Our next top is to Messier 16, a nebula in Serpens, magnitude 6.0, but extended over 30 by 40 arc minutes. It's 7,000 light years away, so it's going to be a fairly low surface brightness nebulosity, given its magnitude and its size. Let's go for it. Bit of a hop. Okay, this is both an open cluster. I believe this is the Pillars of Hercules nebula that has the pillars in it. See a lot of pixelation to begin with. There are splotches of nebulosity around the brighter stars. No actual shape or morphology to this, except in a few little regions where it gets bright enough to be seen. So it's not very extensive, very low surface brightness. So I would say a lot of the cold dark matter has been converted to stars already, but having seen some space telescope imagery of it, Hubble for instance, there's still a tremendous amount of cold dark matter inside this nebula cluster. Shorter hop here will be to Messier 17. I believe it's the Swan Nebula. It's in Sagittarius, but up further north. About the size of the moon, 30 arc minutes, 5,000 light years distance, magnitude 6, except that parts of it are more condensed. So let's do this short little hop. And you can see the image formulating itself. Definitely the Swan Nebula. Give it a chance to stabilize. personally, I think that these new settings, 128 flood and 30 in terms of auto gain control, plus the nebula filter, is doing a pretty good job of both suppressing the bloated stars and bringing out the nebulosity. How about you? Pretty impressive. Beautiful nebulosity, the Swan. Some call it the Nike swoosh, but I don't think the heavens are advertising for footwear. Our next hop is 2 Messier 20. It's about the same brightness as the Swan, about the same size, 28 arc minutes, 5,200 light years away, so very similar in distance. I'm not sure if this is the Trifid or the Lagoon, but let's go take a look at it. As I recall, one of them is not giving a very good view. So I think this is the Trifid Nebula. Change the angle on the screen, see if we can get a little better. Oh, that's weird. Okay, there we go. That looks pretty good on the display for the camera. Notice how the nebulosity is broken up into 3 different partitions. Notice also that it's a star-forming region, although not nearly as progressed as the Eagle Nebula was earlier in star formation. Once again, I'm beginning to like these settings. The pixelation isn't nearly as bad, so it does give it more of an aesthetic. I thought I'd center up the Trifid for a little better view. A little more difficult to get a good camera angle when it's right in the middle of the field. There we have it. Now we're on to Messier 8, which should be the Lagoon. Larger than the Moon, another 5,200 light year distant type nebulosity. And its magnitude is 5.0, so it should be fairly low surface brightness, but it should be, hopefully it'll be reasonably presented here. Let's take a look. I previously centered up the Lagoon, and I'm hoping that'll give me a good, wonderful, okay, very good. It was the Lagoon that was actually the most difficult to capture. I knew it was either M8 or M20 from previous experiences with it. So it's really worked out. These settings seem to work pretty good for trying to center up the Lagoon. Trifid turned out pretty good. You can see how long it takes at 128 flood for the image to reassemble. I head in the wrong direction. There we go. I think we're getting all that can be seen of the Lagoon. There we are, nicely centered. See if we can get a camera angle. There's a nice camera angle for it. Okay, pretty pleased with that. It's not too pixelated, showing lots of variation in luminosity with voids, dark void in between, so it's basically split into 2 star-forming regions. Some cold dark matter in between. Very, very nice. I like these settings. Once again, 128 flood with a 30 auto gain control, plus a nebula filter is giving something that, if not super professional, using lots of techniques to multi-stack images with an off-axis guider, but for real-time imaging, this is quite nice. Notice this really dark contrast area in there. Looks like a question mark or a horse head. It's not, of course, the famous horse head, but it does look a little like a horse head. Signing off on this one. Still fishing for NGC 6888, Nebula Insignis, the Crescent Nebula. It's 20 by 10. It's only 4,800 light years distant. I've seen this magnitude 10. No wonder it's so difficult. I've seen this before under the very best conditions through a 6-inch telescope optically. I've had no success yet with the Rev 2 imager. I have yet to have really good seeing conditions to look at it under. It's still at a bit of an angle. It hasn't culminated, but when it does, it'll be straight overhead. Anyway, I'm going to keep on top of this over time to see if we ever can catch it. Let's see if we have any success with it on this occasion. I'm not getting any look at it whatsoever here on the screen of the handheld camera or the display. Let's give it a little more time to assemble an image. At 128 flood, it should usually take, let's see, it's about 3 seconds times 6, 18 seconds to fully assemble an image if the scope is perfectly stable. We'll be back. I just removed the nebula filter, and this will be a nice little comparison to see how large the images of the stars are without the filter. And that is it for tonight, folks. Carpe Noctem.